Things happen. Things happen, events that boggle the mind and leave us speechless. You know, the Bible is full of examples of things happening and surprising people, unbelievable stories. There were the experiences of the Israelites, you know, how they're just trudging along through the desert and how nature bowed at their feet and the Red Sea parted. There was a story of Mary who was told by an angel named Gabriel that she was going to have a baby. And the angel said to her, "Be not afraid." And Jesus told his reluctant and sometimes skittish followers, "Don't be so worried about it, you guys. Be not afraid." And yet fear really serves a purpose in life. If a child walks out in the middle of the street, you know, it's fear and concern for them that drives us out to the street and pulls them out of danger, right? Fear puts us on alert. It causes the adrenaline to flow through our bodies so that we can wake up to a threat or a perceived threat that's at hand. But what is it, friends, that we're most afraid of, really? What is it that we fear? Maybe we're afraid of not having enough. The song addressed that. Maybe we're afraid of not being enough. And maybe at the very core of our being, we're afraid of not coping, not being able. Well, most of you know that last month, almost a month ago, my mother passed away, quite suddenly, totally unexpectedly. She was out having a lovely day with my father and family members who were there from out of town in Florida, and she shuddered and left, just quickly left. It was just so totally unexpected. And all of us asked, what on earth? What will we do now? And how will we cope without the strength of my mother? For those of you who met her when she was here last year, you know my mother was no weenie. And more importantly, what would my father do? And would one of us need to move to Florida to care for him, to help him cope, to help him not be afraid? I want to share with you a reflection I wrote. It's called Gas Man Pastor. Gas Man. It was a familiar greeting said by gusto by my dad. He worked for the gas company in his early years for the field service department. This greeting identified my dad as he walked into customers' backyards, met up with their dogs, and watched elders peering through the curtains. Dad was followed at the gas company by my brother and my sister, both of whom like to identify themselves as gas man. In his years as a gas man, he wore the gas man uniform, the Navy company-issued pants and shirts, and the shirts always had the important pen holder with all the implements inside. Working through all the Detroit area, he connected, disconnected, and repaired furnaces, stoves, gas mains, appliances. He befriended countless elderly women in the Italian, Polish, and Hungarian neighborhoods. If he learned that they were without family to help out or check in on them, he'd pick up groceries for them long after he'd done the job, or he'd just stop in to say hello. I remember that he noticed a neighbor once, a young, developmentally disabled woman who lived near our house. My dad saw her standing at the bus stop in the snow day after day, and somehow he figured out that she lived on our very own street. So, after meeting her family, he became a part of her daily routine. He would drive her home at the end of every day. He was a hero to the people in our little town, our little steel mill town. Whenever somebody's heat went out, it didn't matter what time of day it was. It could have been 3 o'clock in the morning. Gas man got the call. And he almost always went to their homes because, after all, it gets cold in Michigan. He worked 2 jobs, so we didn't always see him in the evenings. Even then, we always had dinners for 6 every day of my childhood. A few weeks ago, our mother, our friend and confidant, was called to leave this life. Unexpectedly, and I suppose mercifully, we were, and to some extent still are, in shock. Our tribe, all of us, flew as fast as we could to surround my dad, to affirm our love for our parents and our love for each other. It was painful and rich. Several nights before her funeral, I attended the church mass with my father and my aunts and uncle, and we sat where my parents and family always sat. We cried in our grief and at the slightest reminder of my mother. When the priest prayed for the recently departed, he read my mother's name, and there was this gasp, because I guess not everybody had seen the obituaries in the paper. How could that have happened, they must have been asking themselves. She was just here last week, dressed to the nines. One woman who sat in front of Dad looked at him in shock, and she was probably in her 60s, dressed in hot pink with hot pink rhinestone bracelets up her arm, and I think her name was Susie. And after the service, she spoke to my dad about my mother's kindness to her. My father, in his grief and in God's grace, leaned on the pew and gave her his full attention. I was filled with awe or reverence or something like that. How could he be in such a state of mind and heart and listen with patience to the words of someone who simply sat next to them in church every week? And there he was, like a pastor. Perhaps it is from him that I learned some of the gift of pastoring. I would like to think that I listened as intently and as intentionally as Gasman Pastor did that day. In the 3 weeks since my mother died, Dad returned to the arcade where she played her last game. That's where they were. They were in an arcade. Her photograph was on the wall, and people who knew my parents talked with my dad. They gave him her card. You know, they use cards instead of money, and my dad had a card of his own. So he played a little bit, and then he laughed to tell me that he won $500. My dad never won any money. My mother always did. So we decided that it could have been my luckier than anyone mother who had her hand in his win. And then several days later, he was cleaning some leaves around the swimming pool and found a $10 bill in the condo swimming pool. He wondered whether this might be a reminder from my mom that she's keeping an eye out on him. And what did the Gasman Pastor do with his winnings? Well, he wrote checks. He wrote checks to the nonprofits who send little things in the mail, address labels or whatever they are. He said, I didn't send a check to all of them, just a few. Makes me feel good to help someone, he said. Gasman Pastor, thank you, God, for my dad. So I wrote this because I didn't want to lose the moment of observing what happens when you just wait for God's work to occur. Because I was so afraid that I was going to have to leave my life and go take care of my dad who weighs 116 pounds. My dad who is this teeny little powerhouse, Gasman Pastor. Ways open in ways that we never would have expected. The Quakers have an expression of faith, a way to remember when we don't know what to do, when we're afraid, when we're feeling kind of helpless, when we can't see the answer, God provides the way. And the expression is this: way opening. I love that. So simple and so powerful. I put it on my wall at work. Way opening. I can't do it all by myself. It is the Christ in me that does the work, right? Witnessing and remembering my Father's strength, I turned from fear to faith. That's still there, right? Even in our scariest moments, even when I don't think I can figure anything out, and I can't by myself, way opening. And throughout the time I spent with my dad, I witnessed ways opening minute after minute, minute after minute. Centering our lives in God means that we turn when we are afraid, not to our own devices, not to our own ideas, but to our faith. For me, it means to remember that there will be light along the path to show me the way when I cannot imagine what the answer might be. There will always be a light if I will open my eyes and look for it. Way opening means that I might make a commitment without knowing how on earth I'm going to make it happen. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you are inspired to do something, you feel led by God to do something, and you think, I do not know how I'm going to make it happen.